So in general, this discussion is meant to provide a general overview of the history of the written word. We've got the cuneiforms, we've got illuminated manuscripts, the advent of the printing press will be covered. Like I said, we're going to pay special attention to beautiful bindings and all of these materials here at St. Louis Public Library, and they're accessible to the public. These are not really kept behind doors in the sense that you can't see them. You absolutely can come to the library and see these materials by making an appointment with me and my colleagues. So major milestones in early book history. I'm sure everyone has studied the caves that were found with the illustrations in South Africa and then France, and then the pictographs and petroglyphs. But then what we're paying attention to today is written language on clay that begins in Mesopotamia and Egypt. So on the right side of your screen, I have an image, and I hope you can see the tremendous detail of this clay tablet cuneiform. This is an economic text dealing with measurements of fields, and this is our oldest item here at the library. This is Sumerian wedge-shaped language, and it's Sumerian, and it's roughly 2375 BC. And what you're looking at really is almost like an Excel spreadsheet. So it says that imagine it's a ledger with entries that say so-and-so owns this land and this is his job. And it's, like I said, it's tremendously old, but most of the cuneiforms are some kind of record keeping. So we have several others. They're all quite different. The one on the left is a little bit later. So this is Babylonian, and it's chronicles of a royal decree. And so it basically is saying our king is devoted to the gods and they make him a just ruler. To the right of that, we have what's considered a cylinder seal. And those were used they're almost like a bead that would be around your necklace, and that you could roll this design on damp clay and it made this impression of these characters. So if you look closely, you can see that there are carvings of men and women, and each person's cylinder seal would have been a little bit different. And it could have been thought of as someone's signature. This one is really interesting. I always like to show it as well. So imagine that some of these clay tablets actually came in envelopes. So this is a broken envelope. So there's a message on the envelope, and then there's the actual message inside. And one of the things that I'm talking about, like our title of our show, is Hidden Gems. And I bring that up because sometimes there's a message within the message. It's not always obvious at first. And this is an example of that. And moving forward through time and the history of written word, we start to have papyrus scrolls in Egypt and palm leaf books. And what I have here is, this is an example from what we have at the library. And these are fragments from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And these are just small fragments, but very important on papyrus. And move forward a little bit further, and here's an example of a scroll. So no longer are we on clay. Imagine that papyrus scroll had been intact. It would have been much, much longer. So here's an example of the Hebrew manuscript on vellum. So vellum is animal skin, so usually sheepskin. And that was used oftentimes rather than paper, or in addition to paper. And this is in our collection as well. We move forward even further to parchment and illuminated manuscripts. And this is a detail from a 12th century manuscript Bible and the P marks the beginning of St. Paul's epistle to the Romans. And there, you can see there's gold leaf on here, there's illuminations, and there's also beautiful colored inks. This is a really special book too, but we're going to move forward to scroll turning into actual books. So codexes and paper making reaches Central Asia. The Diamond Sutra is just very famous, is in China. And we start to have medieval chained bindings in the libraries of Europe. And this is a book in our collection. And here's an example of what it looks like when you open it. It's on paper rather than vellum, but it's all handwritten. So this predates the printing press. And you can see the chain remains on it from when it was originally made in 14th or 15th century. What's interesting about this book as well is it's a compilation of 7 manuscripts of the written in various hands. So as you page through the book, you can tell each of the 7 books because they're written completely different handwriting. And it's got the original protective studs, and I'll show you here. Here's an example of what a medieval library would have looked like and chained to the shelves. And the reason that was done, of course, is because books were one of a kind. There was no printing press. So each book was its own very special, very valuable, not necessarily monetarily, but the information. There's one of them, only one of a kind. So they were chained so they couldn't be stolen. They were so precious. Now, I hope that this shows up well, the design on this page. So this is a watermark that's in that book. So each of the pages in that book, there are a few that are empty, and you can see that this design was done on the paper. And so it was handmade paper, and that would have been done by probably wires, making that imprint on, and watermarks are a really fascinating thing to study in paper making, and that's unique to that book. Now we're going to move forward to the printing press. So Gutenberg prints his first Bible in Mainz, Germany, and using movable type for the first time, and that was 1456. Now, what we have here is a page from the second printing of the Bible, and that was a few years later. Now, the first printing had 42 lines going vertically, and our copy is the 36-line version. And most people think that it probably wasn't actually Gutenberg. It may have been someone who worked underneath him, and it was done in Bamberg, Germany, just a few years later. So we start to have quite a bit of printing now in Europe. And this gorgeous example of early printing is Aldus Manutius's press in Venice, Italy. And he was very famous for that design that has the anchor with the dolphin around it. And those were called printer's marks. And all of the great printers in Renaissance Europe started to create their own printer's mark, also known as a printer's device, and put them on the front page of a book. And so that's an example of that. And I also want to show you on the next page, this is the shield that we have carved around Central Library. We have 30 of these shields that go around the library. And this is the one devoted to Aldus Manutius, and it's on the front of the library. We have several of these. They're absolutely beautiful. So I did some research where I took photographs of all of our shields around the library and made sure that we had copies of originally printed books by most of them. And I did. I believe I found 30 of those printers were represented in our books. And now we've moved forward to the United States and North America in general. And this is a really interesting book in our collection. If you look really closely to just at the bottom where it says Philadelphia, printed by B. Franklin and D. Hall. So this is Benjamin Franklin when he was, before he was a great statesman, when he was a printer in early America. And so that that's an example of that, to the New World. Now I want to talk more about, like I said, the beautiful bindings of books. Now, this, let me hold on just a second. This book is really interesting because you can tell the cover of it is an illuminated manuscript. And what that is once there was a printing press, manuscripts weren't as valuable. And so this is called manuscript waste, as in waste product. So scraps of discarded, dismembered, handwritten medieval works were commonly used for spine linings, interior leaves, and covers during the first couple of centuries of printing by bookbinders, because they were animal skin, they were very sturdy. And so the photograph on the right shows the title page. When you open up the book, it's got that gorgeous little frog that we love as the printer's mark for him. And you can see that the book was printed much later than the cover was made. And here are some gorgeous bindings that have beautiful threads in silver and in gold. The one on the left is quite a bit older. As you see, that's 1641, and that would have been a pocket-sized Bible that a woman would have carried to church with herself, to church. It was absolutely beautiful, and it may have matched her outfits. The one on the right is in better condition, and it's gold thread on satin, but you see it's quite a bit later. It's a French book from 1840. Here's another absolutely beautiful work. So it has blue velvet and then metal work with great carvings on it. This one's a miniature. I show you on the right side just how small it actually is. So it's very decorative silver filigree with mother of pearl. I don't know if the mother of pearl shows up as well in the photographs, that's the actual background behind the silver. And this book is really neat because it's actually a blank notebook. It's tiny little pages that have never been written in. So it could have maybe been, been like a little keepsake, and you can tell it would have been like a locket too as well. There's a little clasp area for it. This is just a gorgeous little miniature book. Now, this is quite a bit later, but to show that once the printing press was up and running and books became cheaper, some people really missed beautiful bindings. So at the turn of the in the 1900s, the 20th century, some printers started to make gorgeous books again. So what we're looking at here is a completely handmade book. The cover has all kinds of gorgeous opals and stones on it. And on the left side, you see the title page illustration, which is all handmade illustration on vellum. So once again, it's back to vellum and not paper, and it's handwritten manuscript. What's really fascinating about this London company, Sandgorski and Sutcliffe, is they made these gorgeous bindings for people who say your favorite book was this Elizabeth Barrett Browning book. They would create your own copy for you. And what they did was they created a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, the very famous poem. And it was probably the most expensive book ever made. It is thought to have all kinds of gems, including emeralds, and the design was golden peacocks on the cover. And on its way to the United States, it was actually lost on the Titanic. It was meant to be coming to the United States for the person who had purchased it and ordered it, and it was lost. This is another decoration that I think is really beautiful. And it's an example, these are examples of what they call coffered edges. And they were usually in Germany in the 16th and 17th century. So what you might think has been done with this is there would have been a heated tool that would have been used to make the impression on the surface, and that would have probably been done after the gold leaf, after the gilding. So it's really set in there. And you can see that the one on the left, there was some hand painting afterwards to add the colors. These are really beautiful. Now, this is one of my favorite books. I don't know if anyone has seen a 4-edge decorated book before, but the image on the left shows what the book looks like when it's completely closed on the shelf. You just see the gold edges. Now, the image on the right shows what happens when you hold the book at a certain angle and fan the book slightly open. There's a beautiful scene of London. And this was a popular edge design in right around 1800, mostly in England. And I have to tell you, they're somewhat rare, but I find myself anytime I see a book from that era that has a gold edge, I want to fan it open and just see, is there a chance? Is there a chance there's a 4-edge painting in here? Because they are so fun to see them pop open and come to life. And what we also have we have a huge collection of miniature books, tiny, tiny, tiny books. And this is probably my absolute favorite. And you can see it's Bryce's English Dictionary. And around 1900, when it was first published, it was considered the smallest dictionary in the world. I have to tell you, there are books much, much smaller than this now, but it was in this little locket where you could have wore it as a locket. And the glass part is actually the where you can zoom in, you can see like a microscope. So, and here's the page open. I don't know if you can see as well as I can, but we're on the DER to DES pages. I see the word derision. I see the word description. Believe it or not, you absolutely can read these miniature books. You just need that magnifying glass. Okay, so this was all I had set up to show for you today. And these are just a small example of the types of things that we have up here in the Rare Books and Manuscripts department. I'm absolutely happy to talk to anybody who maybe wants to send me an email, which is rjones@slpl.org. We can talk more about any of these items at any time, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have for me today. And we can also talk about some of the other things that we do here at the library.
Renee, why don't you stop share and then we can see everyone on the screen.
Absolutely, let's do it.
So Myra, you have a question?
Yes, that was fast, but quite interesting. I wanted to know, how is it that the library gets these things, like the cuneiform, the papyrus, the scroll of Esther, and all of these rare, like the chain books? How is it that the library gets it? How is it determined whether it goes to a library, a university, or to a museum or something like that?
Well, I'll tell you, the library, our library has been around since 1865. And so many of our materials came from donations early on, but several of the materials I showed today are part of what is called the Grolier collection. And it's a collection that the library purchased in the 1950s. And it was museum type pieces that went on tour in through schools to show children the history of the written word. So the library purchased that collection, like I said, in the 1950s, and we've had it conserved, and we show it that way. And there was a practice around the turn of the last century to sell books for sometimes just the single leaf if the book had been badly damaged. Rather than having a book that was incomplete, there were people who made money selling the books, those individual leaves. But many of our materials Our very library, they went on tour, like I said, to show kids, and people do collect those single leaves. I hope I've answered your question kind of. But the library's got things from all kinds of different ways. Like, for instance, really the cuneiforms, we think they came from 3 different major sources. One is the collection that was purchased in the 50s, and another was a smaller collection called folio files that we bought in the 60s, and a few came from that, and then others came from independent collectors who donated them eventually to the library.
John, did you have a question? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very interesting presentation. I'm wondering, I know that the Rosetta Stone was, we were able to interpret hieroglyphics.
That's right.
But the other earlier forms of stone tablets, etc., the cuneiform tablets, how have we been able to interpret their meaning?
Well, there's from different things. I'll tell you, I have a little thing I was going to say here. In 1835, an Englishman named Henry Rawlinson deciphered the cuneiform inscriptions that were made on a stone that's on the side of a mountain, Behistun, and that's in Western Persia. And that was the key to translating cuneiform writing. So by doing that, he was able to see how Babylonian could be deciphered to Sumerian and onward from then. And it's like you said, the 3 languages on the Rosetta Stone are the way they were able to do that is the same way. So hieroglyphics couldn't be figured out until the Greek could before it. So once there's that key to one of the old languages, they were able to trace it back to others.
Thank you.
We have a couple of questions in the chat box. So let me get to those really quick,
Yeah.
and then we'll move on. Susan would like to know, why would they have written such tiny books to hide them?
Well, it's possible, right? I will say that today they're making books that are so bizarrely tiny. They're almost the size of a grain of sand. And that's just for the novelty of it, right? To see how small we can make a book. And I think that's true of all the ones that you're going to need a magnifying glass. But the ones that are, just a couple of inches big, many of those are children's readers. So alphabet books, there's quite a few that are that small. So they could have been kept in a child's pocket, and they have little illustrations of animals and birds and things like that as they go through the alphabet. So a lot of it's the novelty, but I think once they started making books pocket size, they wanted to see, well, how small can we go? And can you imagine how tiny the metal movable type must have been in that dictionary? Because today, of course, things are digitally printed, so there wouldn't be that actual object, but that dictionary, absolutely, that would have been movable type. It would just been incredibly tiny.
Lee would like to know, are the rare books ever exhibited?
Right, they absolutely are. We had a major exhibit if you've been down to Central Library, we had a major exhibit in the Great Hall just a couple of years ago that showcased some of these materials, but a lot of other things too. And it was called Print to Pixel, and it was the history of the written word as well. But if you wanted to make an appointment with me, you absolutely can just come up to the rare books room, and I do like 1 hour show and tells quite often. to where we talk about these things or other things in the rare books room. I mean, like some people are just really into the miniatures, for instance, and I can pull out 50 different miniatures and we can look at them and study them. Or if you're just interested in illuminated manuscripts, I would just pull out illuminated manuscripts. If you're just interested in local authors, for instance, we have first editions of Mark Twain books, and people would love to see those. Those are fascinating to see. The main thing that with the rare books is we just handle them incredibly gently. There's a good chance I would be the one who handles them. I wouldn't even allow, depending on how fragile the material might be, it could be that I'm just going to be the one to handle it. But we absolutely would set things up for people to look at, to take photographs of. That's not a problem whatsoever. We're very happy to do that as a public library.
Bill, would you like to unmute yourself and?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is sort of about today and going forward with everything, so much in publishing today and the written word going electronic.
Mm-hmm.
What 100 years from now, 200 years from now, what will be considered a rare book, or will be worthy of a rare book collection from 2021?
That's an interesting point.
It's something that
really
that is being lost.
And I think that is a great point. I think that we find through time, we end up needing to save things from all eras, certain media. So I will see. But what I also see talking to younger people all of the time is there is a return to people wanting beautiful books, wanting things in their hands. There's a real return to typography. So the study of fonts and printing presses, doing those things on your own. So young people are always interested in seeing those things as well and learning how to do those on their own. The other thing I see is artist books. So handmade books that are maybe put together in an unusual way. We have a book that is called Primeval, and it is a pyramid shape. And whenever you take the pyramid apart, there's a little capsule of ash from Mount St. Helens. And there's some images in it of maps of the area. So the idea is that it's this volcanic mountain. So I think that we'll see more of that as well. But as far as digital speaking goes, I think the main thing will be, we'll still need the hardware, won't we? So that we can read digital books in the future. And if we lose the reader, we start to have issues with that as well, the different formats. A great question though, interesting to speculate about.
I've also, Renee and everyone, I've also run into someone who was really interested in learning to make paper, which I thought,
yeah,
wow, you never even think about that. You know, I mean, specialty paper to put the written word on. So
absolutely.
to create books, but they were actually trying to learn to make, you know, specialty papers, which, you know, it was like, wow, that's a really interesting concept.
It is really interesting because there's ways to like have create a book and it's completely your own. You make the paper, you make the ink, you do the writing, you do the illustrations, you do the binding. And so there's a lot of throwbacks to that kind of thing going on right now, which is fun to see.
Yeah, it is.
And that's happened through time. Like I said, whenever printing became so cheap in the late 1800s, there was a backlash and people wanted pretty things again. And that's where we started to get things like the Sangorski and Sutcliffe. And if you've studied some of the other small private presses from that era, they were like, we want beautiful books again. We don't want these pulpy, cheap books. And it's funny because in rare books, we have so many materials here and you can tell whenever you've got something that it may be 100 years old, 200 years old, but you can tell when it was mass produced because it is so crumbly compared to some of the other things. Something from 1850 might seem a heck of a lot older than something that's 200 years older, depending on the materials that were used.
So we have from Martin, we have, what will the future of the library be?
Yeah.
More of a gathering place?
That's a great point too. And historically, libraries have been gathering places too. We have up here in my department, we're also the library's archives. So I have all of the documents and photographs of the library's history going back to the 1860s. So like during times of war, like in World War I, the different branch libraries were doing Red Cross. They were doing, they were gathering books together for soldiers so that they could be sent to the camps. So there's always been things like that. And also immigration was huge and during certain those times, especially we had a branch called the Soulard branch that's no longer one of our library branches, but it had a massive influx of Germans, Hungarians, all types of people who lived down there, and they learned English going to that library. That's how they learned. To assimilate and become an American is coming to the library. And we do have here at St. Louis Public Library, we do have an auditorium, and hopefully as we get COVID-19 even further behind us, we'll start to do a lot more in-house programming, which we all love to do, and tours. Some of that's been put off a little bit longer, but it should be a matter of time until we start to do those kinds of things. But you'd be surprised, people still love to pick up, a bestseller fiction title, and we're happy to see that as well. That's not going anywhere.
Well, we also, I'm going to bring up, Renee, that you had mentioned earlier when we were talking about, possibilities of other programs with like tour,
Absolutely.
like almost like a virtual tour or a walkthrough of your website, which they can actually see some of the digital images and photographs that you were talking about. So you want to elaborate on that too?
I would love to do that. So one part of my job besides these beautiful rare books is heading up the digital collections, which are for the most part glass plate negative images that have been scanned at very high resolution and put online. So really it's the best way to see these images. There are thousands and thousands of them from the 1904 World's Fair alone, and I've got those all up online, and you can access those from the library's website. I've got, I think about 2,000 that are from the Streets and Sewers Department. Fascinating photos from the 20s and 30s. And what they were doing, the Streets and Sewers, they were documenting, say, construction on a street corner. But what they also got were the corner butcher shop, confectionery, five and dime, grocery market that no longer exists. And there were hundreds of these street corners like this. And so they're paying attention to the brickwork. They're paying attention to planting trees, maples, but they captured so much else. There's also a huge collection of ones that are the water department. And so if you want to see the documenting the building of the Compton Heights water tower, we've got all those images up there. So, and all the phases of the reservoir being built, and the water tower, and several other things. Also the chain of rocks, the filter intakes that are so cool to see out there in the river. If you can see from the bridge, we've got those being built as well. They're super neat to look at. And those are from the teens, I think most of those are. So you can really get lost in these collections. They're super fun.
Harvey.
Yes. To what extent does the collection which the library has overlap with collections at the History Museum?
Mm-hmm.
And do you work together?
We absolutely do work together. We know them very well. There have been times whenever we've shared things with them, but I would think that mostly we are a little bit different. So there's oftentimes, so bring up the 1904 World's Fair, for instance. They have the original papers. So if somebody wants to read about a certain department, they're going to want to go to the History Museum. If they want to see certain photos, there's a better chance we'll have photos of the Ferris wheel being erected. So we're complementary, absolutely. And we do work with them pretty closely depending on what it is. So a lot of times I'll get someone, an out of town researcher, and I'll say, well, what you're really looking for is going to be at the History Library on Skinker. So we do work back and forth for sure.
So do we have any more? Myra, you have another question?
Yeah, how is it that you, I mean, what is, how is it that you became accredited to do what you did? I mean, what is your background, your training?
Sure.
And, you know, if someone were interested, how would they be, you know, not to do it immediately, but take over your job or something like that?
Yeah.
I could do it elsewhere.
Absolutely. So there are jobs like mine out there. And my background, my undergraduate degree is in American history and political science and also art. But then my master's degree is a MLIS, which is the degree that library science students get. And so in order to get a job like mine, you'll want to get that master's degree on top of any other training. I tell people who are interested in working at a library, the first thing to do is get yourself in the door. If you've got to volunteer your time and be a tour docent or be a shelver for a couple of years while you're in school, do it, because experience is so important. And you really get a leg up as far as knowing a collection of a building and being able to help people, is if you've got any kind of experience whatsoever while you're going to school. So I see there's a question about the library's website. You can reach the library's website at slpl.org.
And I can go ahead and send everyone an email with that information so that you can have that and access it easily, because it was on your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
But if I send it out to your email and the website link, I can send that out to everyone too.
Yeah.
John.
So Renee,
Yeah.
getting back to touring, when do you think that live touring can resume or is planned to resume?
Oh, I think it's really a matter of time. I can't say definitively one way or another, but just this last week, we went to much closer to normal hours everywhere. Not quite what we had were before. But previously we had been, you could only browse for a half hour. You could only have 1 hour appointments in genealogy or at computers. And now we're letting people come in and stay all day if that's what they want to do. So I think there'll be announcements pretty soon. And then we'll go back to having those structured tours like we previously did. But if anybody wants to come see me in Rare Books, I can set something like that up pretty quickly.
Well, you know, our group is looking forward to having tours, going on tours. The group that sponsors this, and one of the tours that we really would like to take would be sometime in the fall or maybe early next year.
Yes.
A tour.
Yeah, I would say probably by the end of the year. We'll see. We'll see.
The library is a work of art in itself. It really is.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, this is a beautiful building to just come to work to every single day. I absolutely love it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
I think that's about it. John, Renee, John Ragman was the person who initiated this today, and
Oh,
we want to thank.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you, John.
yeah,
Yeah,
this is
we
a
met
wonderful program.
through Scott, and it's been a great privilege. I used to go to the library when I was a senior in high school doing research for
Yeah.
my term paper on the Missouri fur trade industry.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You've got a great collection down there.
That's wonderful. And the great fur trader lived next door, the Campbell House, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have one more question in the chat.
Okay.
Do you know of a local book binding company to rebind a
There
book?
is a conservator in town. I believe his name is Noah Smutz. I think you'd be able to find his information online pretty easily. And he restores things really beautifully. If it's something of value to you, it would not be probably very inexpensive to have something completely restored that way, and truly rebound. Sometimes books that we have that maybe aren't quite as valuable, we will build phase boxes, little boxes for them to keep them safe with acid-free paper as well. And that's something we would just do on site to keep it safe. And then probably not refer to it very often once we put it in a box like that.
That reminded me of another question.
Sure.
I saw the Book of Esther scroll. Yeah. Are there any other Jewish rare books that or scrolls that you have in the collection?
That's the only scroll that comes to mind in the rare books department. It's an area that we really don't have as much holdings as we would like to have, to be honest with you. Yeah, we'd love to have a lot more of materials that were Jewish.
Lyra, you have another question?
Of course. So what areas or what kinds of books would you, if you had your druthers, would you like to have to build up your collection?
Oh, what a fun question. It's so hard to say because we really already have so many beautiful items. I will tell you the printer's marks that I showed on the shields carved outside the building, those are really inspiring to me. And so I would say if we could have something from every single one of those printers and that would be complete, that would make me, that would be thrilling for the library, although we've got quite a few. And if you study ancient printers, well, not ancient, but early printers in Europe, there are like William Jaggard, who was the first printer of Shakespeare, official printer of Shakespeare, which we have some individual leaves of the first folio. There's William Caxton, who was really the first great English printer, and we have a few pages of things that he printed. So it's the history-based items I think speak to me the most.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes.
Are any scrolls or books, well, back from the Alexandria Library, Cleopatra's Library, does anyone have anything left from that?
It's my understanding that the library burned to the ground and all those things were lost. I'm sure there's some speculation one way or another, whether or not there were other copies of those materials, other editions. Of course, they would have all been handwritten, but that's always possible.
So another question is, do we have safeguards to save our libraries in case something, catastrophic would happen?
Safeguards? I'm sorry.
Yeah, security.
We absolutely do.
What would happen to?
Yeah, so we have, number one, we have alarm doors on the rare books rooms. that only a handful of people have access to the rooms in which these materials are kept. The other thing is that there are fire doors just outside of here, so it would contain a fire from the rooms where these materials are kept as well.
Okay, thank you.
Susan?
Just to add to that, we did a tour of the library, and I remember the ceilings were so beautiful, and they look like wood, but they're not.
Right,
And
they're plaster.
They're plaster, and I remember thinking, well, what a good idea if there's a fire. You know, you don't want to have a whole ceiling made out of wood if there's a fire. So I thought that that was very interesting, that it looked like what it was beautiful.
Yeah. That is a fantastic point. Yeah. And like you said, if anyone gets an opportunity to come down to Central and especially visit that second floor where those 4 beautiful rooms are, as well as the Great Hall, it's just beautiful. It's just a lovely place to be.
So I think that might be the end of the questions. Anyone else have a question or another comment? Harvey, did you have something? No.
I guess I was wondering, hi everyone, what's the cutoff in terms of age? Like how old is old for the collection, or like how new is old, if that makes any sense?
Well, I think that rare doesn't always mean old. So when I brought up the artist books, for instance, those are unique and they're usually runs of just a couple hundred. So we purchased those for this room as well. So they're a little bit different. So they're going to always be rare because there weren't very many made, but they are contemporary artist books. They're new. But I would say the cuneiforms obviously are the oldest things, but then the early printed works from around 1500, whenever we have the entire book and not just a single leaf, those are pretty special and rare as well. The other thing we keep up here that's also wouldn't be considered old is we like to highlight local authors. So not just Missouri authors, but St. Louis in general. And it can be things that I guess they're local history or they're even fiction, but we would keep a pristine copy of their book and oftentimes signed if they donate it to us. And over time, sometimes those don't keep their value, but they're unique enough for us to make sure that we keep something like that here at the local public library.
I don't see any more questions. Thank you so much, Renee.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
Really, really a wonderful program. The photography that you did, sharing of the books and all the ideas that you brought to us today are just so wonderful. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy. You're absolutely welcome. And we can certainly do something like this again. If anyone has any ideas of something that we could pursue a little bit more in depth, or if we wanted to talk about those photograph collections, absolutely reach out to me and let me know.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here today, and we will see you later.
Bye everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.